Hello and welcome back to the studio. Tell me, do you have a palette that looks more like my shirt for a painting like this? Just too many colours? Well, let's see if we can simplify things. As you can tell from the thumbnail, I did this with just 2 colours. Step 1, we'll pick a nice reference photograph. Then we'll mix some colour and we'll make a little colour chart for future reference. Some simple layouts, working in layers, and final highlights. It's a lot of fun just working with 2 colours. I think I have to change this shirt for something a little bit less loud. Now, time to dive into the video. So you've seen from the thumbnail, I'm going to try and paint this painting with as few colours as possible. A very limited palette, possibly 2 colours plus white. So which 2 colours will I choose? Well, I need to do a little bit of testing because I need a nice yellowy orange colour here. I need a nice blue colour that work together. I'm using this, which is my standard grey tone canvas. This is just a neutral grey colour. I could have gone for something with a more sort of oatmeal beigey sort of colour, a buff titanium white, but I think overall, looking at the reference picture, there's a little more grey tone to this than there is that sort of buff oatmeal colour, although I'm very tempted with this sky. So let's have a look and see what I've done. I've set up some tape just a little above halfway. This isn't a 50-50 painting, it's just a little more beach than it is sky. And I put a piece of tape along here, so I've got a nice straight horizon line. Now let's look at the paints I'm going to use. For this painting, I've decided to use cerulean blue and some raw sienna. Now, raw sienna is one of those pigments that's been used, well, almost since the beginning of art. I think they even used some of these sorts of colours when they were doing cave paintings. So we've got a bit of history with this one. And cerulean blue, well, that just does a lovely sky colour, perfect for a lovely seascape. And of course, I'll be adding some white to it. For my brushes, I've got a selection. These are all very small, 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch, fan brush, liner brush, and I'll probably add a dagger brush as well. But these are cheap and cheerful, inexpensive brushes, and the right sort of size for this sort of canvas, which is 16 by 12 by 16. I'll get this right in a minute. So I'm going to start painting the sky. Ooh, I should add, I'm going to be using refined linseed oil. That's right, there are no Bob Ross products used in this painting. I'm going to do it very much like the old masters would do a painting, a traditional style. So wet onto a dry canvas in the main. To get me started, I put a couple of drops of refined linseed oil into a little dish. I'm going to take my smallest flat brush here and I'm just going to touch it into a little bit of oil first of all. I want that to be the first thing on my brush, the oil. It's easier to wash off. Now, if we have a quick look at our reference picture, and I'll bring it up in the corner there, I need to start off by using some titanium white to sort of get the brightness into the centre of my painting. I tend to like to work from light to dark, but I know other artists work from dark to light, so there's no problem now. This bright spot is a little off centre. Of course, it's about 1/3 the way across, which is a bit of a classic for me, isn't it? So I'm going to just start off by putting in a little ball of light. And I say dry canvas today, so this colour will go on and be quite stiff. So I'm going to be working this into the canvas, even though it's got a little bit of that linseed oil. So this colour is going to stick pretty good. And I want to think about painting a little bigger than I think I need it, because I know the blue is going to come creeping in and some of that raw sienna is going to come creeping in as well. So get this a little bigger and a little bit more intense. Now, I'm not too worried if I force paint down under the tape, I can fix that up. And very, very soon, if I bring the reference picture up in the corner, you can see that that sienna colour comes creeping in. In fact, I think there's probably only one spot where there's any pure white left. In other words, it's all graduated. And I'm going to extend this out along the horizon line. A little touch more oil to make moving my paint a little easier. See, instantly, tiny touch of oil makes a big difference. And some nice white over there as well. Now, the one thing you'll find when you're using titanium white paint is that sometimes it's not quite as opaque as you might imagine it would be. In other words, it's a little more transparent, a little bit more see-through, and you'll sometimes put it on and think to yourself that should cover that in completely, and yet the grey will come grinning through, and that's okay. We'll just come back and give that a second coat. I'm going to go into my raw sienna colour, and you can see when it hits that white, you see you get that lovely warm orangey colour, sort of a bit of a yellowish glow. Absolutely beautiful for a seascape like we're doing today. And I'm going to just take some of that into my painting. And so I'm going to let this sort of creep its way along the horizon line. I think that's actually a cloud. Again, the more you study your painting, sometimes the more you spot things. And so here's going to be the brightest area, so I'm not going to take my sienna into that part. Hands up those of you who have been stood in an art shop, peering lovingly at all those amazing colours and wondering which one you should buy to add to your collection of other paints that you've yet to explore. I'm going to put my hand up. I'm responsible for buying paint that I haven't yet used, and I have lots of colour that I've yet to explore, and yet I'm still tempted to buy another paint, another colour. Fortunately, I've kicked my brush habit, so that's not too bad, but isn't it strange? We're like moths to a candle, us artists, aren't we? We see a new colour in the shop and think, God, I've got to have it. I must have it. So you see very quickly there, whilst I've been rambling on, I've dropped in my background sky. I dropped in a little bit of that raw sienna colour. I think it's a good colour where it goes over the grey. See how it picks up that lovely sort of darker tone? Grey was definitely the right choice. But I've quickly got to start adding in blue now. And when blue hits this colour, well, we do get another grey colour. So let's switch brushes and get myself a slightly bigger flat brush, which I'm going to be using for my background sky. Cerulean blue. Once again, I've touched off my brush into a little bit of linseed oil first, just to get the bristles a bit softer, a bit more pliable, get some oil through the brush first before I start adding colour. And I'm going to go straight into this lovely cerulean blue colour. Now, I did a little bit of testing, and I'm going to do a little clip of showing my colours being tested, because cerulean blue was one of sort of several that I could have chosen. I had cobalt blue, cerulean blue, phthalo blue, Prussian blues, any number of blues, and I picked this one in the end. So I'll do a little bit of a cut in here, a bit of B-roll that will show you why I chose this colour. Well, I'm a great fan of making my own colour charts. You'll see these on my other videos. Let's make one for this reference photograph. To start my colour wheel, I'd already decided that raw sienna was the colour from my sky. I take a small sample on a cotton bud. So that's my common colour. Now I just have to figure out how to get those lovely greens and a nice blue for the sky. I'll take one of each of the blue colours I have available. Add a small amount to my colour wheel, and then just add some white, just so I can see what a lighter version would look like. This is a great way to work out exactly what colour combinations work best for your painting. And here we see my choice is made. Cerulean blue and a little touch of raw sienna. I think that's the one that works best, but it was a close run thing with phthalo blue. I even tried using orange as the base colour, but a little too vibrant, I think. In the meantime, I'm going to start blocking in my sky, and looking at the reference, you'll see that this top left-hand corner is the darkest blue colour. And again, you can see that if you put it on quite neat, you get this really rich, strong blue colour. Now, something which came up in my last painting, a comment made, and I think it's not the first time I've heard it, it's how little paint I actually use to start my paintings. And I know that some of us struggle with our paintings. We find we go into almost mud mode because we've started off with just too much paint. And I start off with a very, very thin glaze of colour. I try and get away with as little paint as I can to get down those initial layers of colour. As you see, with a little tiny drop of linseed oil here, this is actually quite wishy-washy, but yet still full of colour. So you don't have to go crazy when it comes to laying down those first colours. Use smaller amounts of paint than you would normally do. You can always add more to the painting, that's not a problem. But starting off a little bit thick and heavy, nah, we can get ourselves into some bother. So start thinner and add paint gently as you go. Now I've sort of favoured this left hand corner here being the strongest blue colour. Looking at the reference picture, I'll bring it up in the corner. You can see that the left corner, compare it to the right corner, you can sort of see that the right corner is subtly lighter than the left. So I've gone sort of full neat cerulean blue here in the corner. This is pure colour. Okay, and as I go across, I'm going to bring in some of the white to lighten my tone, and all through here it's quite a bit paler blue colour, and you can see I've got my patch of white in there. So let's start blending a little bit of this paint. So after that last little sequence of time-lapse, you see I've pulled in my cerulean blue sky, and look at all these lovely little extra details I was able to include by just using that cerulean blue as a glaze, and then allowing some of that greyness to sort of peek through from underneath. And I know that it's not in the original picture, but I've managed to sort of create this illusion that there is a lot of detail going on in my painting. Actually, there's almost nothing here. I'm just letting the underpainting sort of grin through, the greyness grin through in places, and I'm using the wetness of the paint to actually create some little effects in the sky. Not in the original painting, but I don't mind. This just adds to the whole effect. I've even tried to get the suggestion of a little bit of a burst of light coming from the horizon line, which I may or may not keep in. I don't know. It could be a bit chintzy. So we'll decide later on. But I'd rather have it as the basis to start from than not have it and then wished I'd put it in. I think I'm probably going to end up sort of reworking all this part of my painting anyway. So for the time being, it's fine and I'll live with it. Just remember, if you're going to do these sorts of things, it's no good having wibbly wobbly beams of light. Beams of light travel in a straight line and they generally travel from one point. So if you have a beam of light that's in over here and another beam of light coming in over here, it can look a little bit odd, and some of these lines are not quite right. So for the time being, I'm just going to massage that in with my finger. Now, I bring up the reference picture up in the corner here again. I want to have a look at some of these clouds in here, particularly that sort of almost grey colour they've got into them, particularly through here. Those sorts of clouds, that some on the horizon line there, we've only got, let's say, raw sienna and cerulean blue. And I tested my colours out, so I kind of already know. I'm using my cerulean blue, well, sorry, my raw sienna brush. I know if I take those two colours and I mix them together in the right proportion, they'll make a nice green colour. But if I kind of use a little bit more of that raw sienna colour, and this is a bit of a classic mixture, cerulean blue and raw sienna. These colours have been used for skies, well, since time began. And often if you look at the old masters, you'll see that they've got these sort of grey-green skies. And this is the colours they were using. Now, let's see if I can drop in a little bit of a pale greyish colour. I'm going to tone this right down. Let's see if I can work in a little bit of something in here. There you go. So let's a little bit of a test of my colours, and if I don't like things, I can always come back and change them again. Going more to the blue side, the cerulean blue side tends to produce a a much stronger green colour, which is a bit sort of chancy. I'm not going to put that cloud in through there because I've got to do some more brightening on this sky. And I'm going to just drop in a little bit more strength of colour down here on the horizon line. Just touch in a few little bits here as well. There you go. I don't want to go any heavier than that though, because this colour is going to start really going quite green. And you can quickly see how this colour is going to work beautifully for my sea portion. Now, bear in mind, this is over a piece of tape. You're not going to see all of that. Now, let's have a quick look at these clouds. Some of them, and I'll bring up the reference photo in here, are quite soft background, and I've sort of indicated where they're already in the painting. So I've sort of partly painted these. There's some slightly bright ones here. Maybe they catch a little bit of the raw sienna on their under edges, and there's some nice clouds over there. But you don't have to overcrowd your painting. And there is a temptation sometimes when we're faced with a reference photograph with lots of clouds that we have to paint them all. And my best advice is not to. I'm going to pick up just a small amount of paint on this very old crabby looking film fan brush. It's got a chunk missing out of it. I wonder why that one was on its own in the box. Now I know. So I picked up just a small amount of paint here, and I'm just going to just rough in this nice sort of patch of cloud over in here. This is a little bit strong for my taste, so I'm going to sort of grab some of that colour and sort of soften it down into the painting. I'm just going to leave just that little shadow under the edge there. I might come back and fiddle with that. Oh, I might not. Okay. Let's say I'm just sort of putting in what I imagine would be the clouds I need to have. Now there's a nice big clump of cloud just here, just up and sort of to the left of that bright spot of light in the sky. And again, just notice I'm not going to paint all of it. I'm just going to put in that nice block of cloud. Got a few nice straggly bits on the back of it, and there's a nice straggly bit going there, but it's heading right for that corner, and I'm not too keen on that. I don't like things going off the corners too much because they tend to sort of take your eye out of the painting. So again, I'm going to just squiggle that in. I think that looks quite good. Put a few little bits and bobs into there, and there's some nice little bits and pieces in here which I'm going to use my little rolling strokes for. Just kind of let the brush sort of wander about. Now I haven't done any of this in time lapse. I'm just doing this in normal speed to show you how briefly and how quickly I paint my skies. I think there's a great tendency just to work too hard at this, and you almost wear yourself out. You can almost unpick a lovely painting just by overdoing it slightly, putting in just a few nice lumps of white there, and just get a little flick with the brush. Do I need any more? Well, there's a couple of bits and bobs over in here. I'll just drop those in. Again, no time lapse. I'm doing this in real time because I really can't emphasize this enough. There's so much painting you need to do in this area. Don't put all your energy into this background. Now, as I say, my canvas is sort of semi-dry. I'm not sure if it's dry enough, and my colour's a little bit stained with blue, so maybe I'll just attempt to put in a little more brightness in here. See how that just pops a little brighter, a little sharper. And put a few little suggestions of light coming from that central spot. See how that second layer there really intensifies that part of my painting. It really kind of gives it a little burst of extra power, doesn't it? Right, I think I might just sit back for my painting for a bit, drink my cup of tea, and see if I need to do any more with this. But honestly, I think I might be there with it already. It was nice and quick, wasn't it? Right, time to get this tape off, I think. We can come back and fiddle with this if we need to. If my video is giving you some inspiration and encouraging you to do your own painting, then that's a great thing. But you could do something to help me. You can give my little painting a thumbs up and leave a comment. You can subscribe to the channel. And if you do, don't forget, ring that little bell so you'll be one of the first people to know about a new video that I release every Monday. Now, back to the video. Time for a bit of planning. You know, it's one of my favourite things to do. And I'm going to actually use a pencil. Remember, this is dry. And I could have drawn this all in before we started the paint, but I just wanted to get on with the sky to show you don't have to stick to doing things in an exact order. I've got a pencil here, and all I'm going to do is just to drop in really one main line, which is where the sea and the actual beach meet. And as I say, it's not a straight line. It's got some nice little swoopy bits in it. Swoops, there we go. And look at that, I've completely missed that mark, haven't I? Oh well. Does it matter? Not so much, does it? Not so much. I can leave that bit in there because there's a little piece coming up the beach. And it's sort of, I've gone very pale with it, not really gone too dark with this, but I can come back in now with my pencil and really get much bolder with this. Now I'm happy with the rough position of everything. I can drop that in. There's another nice wave behind it. Literally dropped in two very important points in the water and on the beach with just a kind of a pencil line, nice and zigzag, nice and broken. And now you can approach this part with a little more confidence. You're not going to run out of position. And I washed my brushes up and I'm going to re-wet them again in some linseed oil to get the bristles nice and soft. Remember, the first thing that goes on my brush will be the last thing I wash off, and linseed oil is a lot easier to wash out of a brush than colour. So always just start with a little bit of oil, and I'm going to go back into white, which is what I started with on my sky. A little bit of the raw sienna colour, drop that over there. This is white with a hint of raw sienna in it. And so just drop that in here along the waterline here. At this point here, you can't really sort of define where one stops and one starts, so we can get pretty bright just there. Oh, there we go, just to get a nice little touch of colour onto there. So quite a pale colour here. Again, not a lot of colour on my brush. So I don't want a bright green sort of water here, but I do want to sort of just introduce the suggestion of a little colour in here without it going bright green. So I'm just literally moving some colour out of the way. A little darker at the edges, I think. A little bit more texture on the water here. I just picked up a little more of that raw sienna colour with just that tiny little touch of blue running through my brush with some white. So you get almost a greyish colour coming through there. It's very subtle and it can look very green. And I really hope it doesn't look that green on camera. It's very hard sometimes when I'm painting and I see things in real life, then I see it on screen and it can look very different. I think, that doesn't look anything like the colour I'm actually painting. So sometimes I have to play with the colours a little bit more. Slightly stronger wave through the background there. I might try and just drop that one in. Yeah, not quite getting the colour I want here, I don't think. Let's go a little darker. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. But notice how I sort of crept up on it. And you'll find this as you paint and you do more and more painting, that you'll get more adept at sneaking up on a colour. Rather than going in sort of gung-ho and too strong, you'll get used to being a little bit more kind of cautious with your colour mixtures, and you won't go quite so mad with them. Just picking up some cerulean blue, maybe a little touch of the sienna colour, just a hint, to darken that colour a little bit more. See how that darkens it, and it starts to go a little shade of green. Now this looks much too strong to me. I know it does to you, and you'll be thinking, oh, you got it wrong. It's actually okay. I've got to put a little drop of linseed oil into it again. I'm not worried about this being too dark. If it is, then I can just let it sit for a little while, and I come back and I can paint across this with some white and put in a little bit of detail here. So again, I'm not particularly worried if it looks too strong at this stage. Keep it nice and pale through that section. Well, after a quick stand back and a ponder and a look from a distance, can you see a mistake I made when I drew these lines on here? Measure the distance between the horizon line to this point, so just under this bright spot, maybe here to here, and then from here down to here. And look at this. Under that bright spot, I'm halfway down, whereas on here, I'm less than halfway. So you see, I drew this line a little bit too low. I kind of guessed I had. I thought I might have crept down a bit low. But see what happens is you can end up gobbling up most of the lovely beach area that you'd set aside. This line is too low. This all needs to be a little bit higher. So you see these mistakes creep into our painting. The dark shadow line here should probably be just a little bit tighter in here. And then this gap in here needs to be a little bit smaller. So it's always worth taking that few minutes to stand back from your painting and just do a quick measurement. Check by eye. Do a quick visual check to measure distances. The more you do this, the better at it you get. So you start to train your eyes to measure things. So I'm going to jiggle around with this a little bit and move things about. I'm going to start mixing out some dark green colours for this area. I'm going to block in these lines and get them in the right place. So that's next. And I'll do a little bit of time lapse through this section. So I think I've caught that in time. This line here, well, I'll just dissolve that with some paint, and I just want to block in this area here. Now there's some quite blue-grey colours down here in the foreground. There's some lovely raw sienna colours through here, touches of light on the beach, so reflections very much of the sky. So I'm going to sneak in with my little flat brush here, got a touch of white, a touch of the raw sienna on it, and just grab it, make a little pale colour here. And I'm going to just sort of block in what I think is going to be a reflection of the sky colours here on the beach. Again, I'm doing this as a glaze, and I'm not too worried about it being not exactly right at this stage. As I say, as a glaze, I can go over this. See, I'm just going to dissolve that line, just going to take my brush and rub through it. And I'm going to just block this in, and then I'm going to probably leave this to sit then overnight, and then I'm going to come back tomorrow and I'm going to sort of add details over the top of this. And working in a series of layers is very much how paintings were done in times gone by, is a series of thin glazes and layers over the top. So that's my initial phase of the seascape part of my painting done. And you saw at the very end there, I got my fingers into the paint and just pushed in a little bit of colour. I didn't have a clean brush and I wanted to just get that colour into there without it blending so much. And sometimes, as I often tell you, sometimes you get a little bit of paint on your finger and just sort of smudge it into the canvas. It's the absolute best thing to do. It's the most sort of like direct way of getting paint onto a canvas without it blending too much. So this is it for today. I'm going to leave my painting alone overnight to dry, and when I come back tomorrow, this will have stiffened up just a little bit. I can come back and start adding all the lovely little details. But again, this is just a sketch, so I'm not too worried if it doesn't follow the exact sort of line of the original photograph. That's more for inspiration and not too much for perspiration. Okay, see you tomorrow. Good morning. What for you was just a split second is actually now the following day. My canvas has just been sitting overnight, and if I come back and touch it, it is still wet, but it's sort of got a tackiness to it now, which means that I can now overlay some more colour on top without it all blending together quite so easily. Now, a phrase you'll sometimes hear people talk about is what's called fat over lean, and quite simply all that means is that a lean paint is one without too much oil in it. In other words, it's a fairly dry colour. Most of Bob Ross's colours that were dark were considered to be lean, so he would always put down a layer of dark colour first, and then the highlights were always oily, something called fat. They always got a lot of oil in them, they're quite fatty and they're quite runny. And the same techniques apply mostly here. I painted as much as I could yesterday, and I've left my canvas to sit and dry so that some of these darker colours can dry a little bit more. In other words, they become more lean, which means that I can now come back and add another colour on top without it blending so much. And of course you can take a colour which is fairly lean, like this blue colour, and you can make it fat by adding a touch of linseed oil to it. Now, I washed my brushes overnight, so the very first thing I have to do, of course, is simply to dampen the brush. Now, if you do saturate the brush, then my advice is simply touch it off on a little bit of paper towel so that we can actually go straight into the paint without making a real puddle. It looks a little bit more glossy than I want it to, so let's add a little bit more neat paint to there. Okay. So here's a particular mixture of white. He had it made so that it was fairly firm and dry, whereas traditionally they tend to be quite wet. So all I'm doing here is I'm going to work in a little bit of the blue. The green shadow here, or the very dark shadow colour, is obviously the light of the light coming across the water here. This is the shadow under the edges of the wave. And in between each of the waves, there's sort of like a flat bit, which can be very bright. And you can get some lovely reflections from the sky. There we are. So there you go. By not forcing your painting to take colour, you actually kind of come out winning a little bit more. Okay. Now I can come back and I can add some nice detail to this. Let's have a quick look at our reference photograph again. I'll probably zoom in on this a little bit. The area I'm looking at now is this area in particular. I'm going to start working on all these little details and these little veins of colour here, little bits of light blue colour, sort of shimmering lights across the water in here. And this takes a little bit of time to work on this, and you can add some more colours and details to the background in here. And just look at all this lovely detail on the beach in the foreground. So we could spend quite a lot of time detailing this painting, but I really just want to get in some of these main blocks of colour. I want a little bit of highlight on top here, maybe indicate the foam on top of that wave just kind of tumbling over, and just adding in a few little details. But you can get really caught up in this and have a whale of a time with it, and indeed you can actually make it into a really nice painting. So let's do that next and try and get some of this detail onto our painting, maybe increase the shimmer of light on the water as well. Some of my favourite brushes for this part of the technique is to use some flat brushes. Now, Bob didn't use flat brushes, he used filbert brushes, which is a very, very traditional oil painting brush to use, a fill, but I actually like using these. They're dagger brushes, they're synthetic or nylon brushes. They work very well. They hold their shape really nicely. That's one of my favourite dagger brushes, and that's how they come. They're already trimmed like that. But nice little flat brushes, and these, well, cheap as chips. Again, they're not expensive, and you can get some really decent sort of paintings done with them. White, and I've sort of made a nice sort of dull kind of colour here. I don't want this to be too shiny, not just yet. And I want to sort of think about adding in some of these little shimmers back here on the water. And this is where a little flat brush really comes into its own, because you can sort of just jiggle backwards and forwards. You can just work the very edge of the brush into the painting and get in some nice little detailing here without having to work too hard at it. And I'm keeping this fairly, let me make that a little bit brighter for you so you can see what I'm doing. There we go, I've added a bit more white into it. Now, bearing in mind that this water is fairly flat, although it's obviously the sea, it's going up and down a little bit, but by and large it is fairly sort of flat and level with little bits of up and down movement in it. So you really want your paint to sort of be sort of sitting as though it were on the surface of the sea, and add a little bit of movement into it here and there. Now, as I'm doing this as a highlight, if you find your paint doesn't stick, then of course it means that your paint is too lean. In other words, it's not sticking properly. And that's when you would add in a little touch of linseed oil. And instantly the paint will want to stick a little more easily. And you keep adding small amounts of linseed oil until you get your paint to be the right consistency so it sticks easily to your painting. Now, as I say, it takes some experimenting when you're doing this sort of thing. Getting just that right mixture to make your paint stick takes practice. As you see, if I just touch my brush to the canvas now, the brush just leaves a lovely little mark, a lovely little sort of suggestion of a shimmer. There's a little suggestion of a wave in here, so I might just kind of touch and pull over, make a little sort of flip with my brush. There we go. Just touch and pull over. So we can get this idea that there's a little wave in here. I can see my little wave rolling over. I'm making it a little brighter than in the reference photograph for artistic sake. I want it to actually sort of show up as opposed to being a little bit sort of murky. See how glossy my paint is there. Now, I say glossy, I'm not talking about running wet. Again, you can easily overdo it with this, and you can just put in just slightly too much linseed oil or whatever you are using on your painting. I like using linseed oil. I'm used to using it. It's one of my favourite mediums to work in. And I find I get some reliable results with it. But there are others. You might like to use turpentine, or liquin is another favourite one. Many artists use liquin. I'm just used to using linseed oil. I'm going to do a little bit more detailing through here, and a little bit more detailing through here. Same thing, I'm using that same brush, and I'm going to vary my colours a little bit as I go. And of course, I'll do this with some time lapse. Well, over that last little session of time-lapse, you saw me switch brushes from smaller flats to a sort of medium flat, occasionally a liner brush, just to start detailing up these waves. And I think I've reached the point now where I've put enough detail into my painting at this stage. It's better to have just some really lovely sort of little specks of colour here and there to really draw your eye into the painting. And it can get a bit too busy, which is what I feel is happening in here a little bit. So I'm going to sort of leave this now and actually start working on this beach here and just kind of trying to put in a little bit of the detail in here as well. But I'm going to hold back a bit. This, I think, well, I might have to calm it down a bit. The rest of it, I quite like. So let's work on adding some detail here on the beach. Again, I'm going to do some time lapse with this, so you just see me using the same colours over and over and over. So there's a ton of detail in here which you could put in, but there's as much to be left out sometimes. And I've got a little bit of I just made up a really dark green colour here. This is a little bit of the blue and the raw sienna here. And I've made up really kind of a strong blue, almost a blue-green colour here, but I think that's going to be it. I just feel I've lost a little bit of the depth of colour in here. I've just put a little bit too much highlight in here. I'm going to just come back in. And this is a neat little technique if you're doing seascapes and you think you've over highlighted things, just come back in with some of the dark green colour here and you can just punch back in a few little shadows into here. So anywhere that's a little bit sort of over the top, just put in a few little strokes, put back in some nice little shadows into the surf, and you can calm things down here. You can sort of take that brightness off of here, which has gotten a little bit kind of carried away, and you can just darken it down. Darks again, just punch those back in, and before you know it, you've managed to paint a really lovely sketch of a seascape that you could use then as the basis for another seascape. And I did this all with just those two colours, with the sienna, raw sienna, and a little touch of cerulean blue. I encourage you to have a go at doing your own quick little sketches. Now, what have I left out of here? Can't help thinking there's something missing from the sky. I don't know. Let me stand back and have a think about it. I see what it was. It was the seagull, and I've made up another one of these really dark blue colours. And remember, seagulls, I like to paint them like a pair of eyebrows. So one coming in this way and one coming in that way. You see you get the wings and you get the head and tail all in one. You can make the wings a little more arched like that. I hope that works well. You can see that on my palette. And of course you can change the angle a little bit. Now it's not terribly easy to do when you're painting on a surface which is moving. But you see, you can change the angle, you can change the shapes. But use a little flat brush to do it is my secret. And whatever you do, oh, don't paint those McDonald birds. Now, top tip for you, if you're kind of unsure about doing these sorts of things, then don't put them in. It's absolutely fine. But if you're going to put them in, put it over a piece of cloud, which you could disguise it if it goes wrong. Here's my bravery test. There we go. So I've just done a little crisscross, nice and simple. Let's do something a little more complicated. Maybe do something wheeling up in the sky here. There we go. So it looks like that one's sort of flying that way and this one's sort of flying that way. One more. There should always be three, shouldn't there? Maybe I'll put it right up here in the sky. Maybe they're all flying across. There we go. So there we go. I've got three little gulls. A little bit more of a tail on that one there. So I've got my little detail brush back. Touch of white. And I'm going to just hit the underside of this wing. A little bit of light. That's all it takes. even the other side of the body there. And I think maybe some light down here as well. So just going to finish off this shimmer of light on the beach. This nice sort of rippling effect you get with some sand that catches that lovely light in the distance as it goes down. Don't forget, save that little shadow in there from the wave. And I think we need a little more of a pop on the edges of this wave here. And I've left this right to the very end because my painting's near enough dry now, and I can do this without picking up any colour. So sometimes you have to be just a little bit patient to rush our work. And with that, I think I have a lovely finished seascape. So there you have it, the whole process from reference photograph to finished painting with just 2 colours. A limited palette can be your best friend sometimes when you're learning to paint. Now, if this has inspired you, there's some more lovely videos for you to watch coming right along. Happy painting, people!